The Great Northern Departure, a comprehensive analysis of Florida's shifting real estate and tourism landscape. While the political discourse in the early months of 2025 was increasingly defined by unconventional rhetoric regarding the potential annexation of Canada as a hypothetical 51st state and the introduction of a robust tariff framework, a quiet yet profound transformation began to destabilize the foundation of Florida's luxury real estate market. For the better part of half a century, the relationship between Canadian seasonal residents and the Sunshine State was viewed as an immovable cornerstone of the local economy. However, this historical certainty began to crumble as long-term property owners started to liquidate their assets in a synchronized and unprecedented manner. This movement was not merely a series of isolated transactions, but a clear signal of a demographic shift that the Florida tourism and real estate industries are deeply hesitant to acknowledge publicly. Data synthesized from Federal Reserve Bank records indicates that within a mere 30-day window following the heightening of trade tensions in early 2025, the volume of residential listings in Palm Beach County escalated to a level that surpassed any peak seen in the previous decade. This was not a gradual market adjustment, nor could it be dismissed as a standard seasonal fluctuation. It was a definitive and sudden surge, the kind of concentrated market behavior that typically occurs only when an entire demographic reaches a collective, emotional, and financial decision to exit a region. Verified public records corroborate this narrative, revealing that over 300 high-value homes in Palm Beach County with registered Canadian mailing addresses were sold within the 2024 to 2025 fiscal cycle. Locations that have long been synonymous with Canadian residency, such as Boynton Beach, West Palm Beach, and Boca Raton, served as the primary epicenters for this migration. These were not distressed sales, nor were they driven by the fear of foreclosure or individual financial instability. Rather, these were calculated exits by individuals who had spent decades weaving their lives into the fabric of Florida, individuals who had celebrated 30 winters in the same neighborhoods, and who were now choosing to walk away because they felt fundamentally unwelcome in a nation where the highest office seemed to regard their home country's sovereignty as a subject of mockery. This phenomenon is far from being a localized anomaly confined to a single county. Instead, it represents a systemic trend that is currently rippling across the entire Florida coastline. From the cosmopolitan high-rises of Miami and the upscale corridors of Fort Lauderdale to the pristine communities along the Gulf Coast, real estate professionals who have dedicated their careers to navigating the complexities of Florida's luxury markets report that the current environment is unlike anything they have encountered in their professional lives. One prominent broker, who had maintained a consistent Canadian clientele for over 12 years, recently shared that her inquiries from that demographic had dropped to zero virtually overnight. This total evaporation of interest represents a significant economic crisis because Canadian investors are not merely transient tourists. They are the largest single group of international real estate buyers in the state, historically accounting for approximately 17% of all foreign property acquisitions and contributing a staggering sum of over $1 billion to the economy annually. These individuals anchor entire communities through their payment of property taxes, their investment in local small businesses, and their long-term social presence. The impact is perhaps most visible in the hospitality sector, where institutions like the Atlantic Hotel and Spa in Fort Lauderdale, a property that has historically marketed itself as a Canadian home away from home, reported a 32% decline in bookings by the summer of Downtown Arshawu. By the end of the year, the atmosphere had shifted from concern to desperation, with hotel management publicly expressing an urgent need for the return of their northern guests, even as they acknowledged that the reasons for the absence were rooted more in a perceived lack of dignity and respect than in simple financial variables. The data gathered from surveys within the Fort Lauderdale hospitality industry provides a transparent view into why this abandonment is occurring with such intensity. While 50% of the guests who ceased their annual visits pointed toward the broader economic environment that took hold in January 2025, a more granular analysis of their feedback reveals a deeper emotional fracture. It is not fundamentally about the fluctuating cost of travel or the implications of trade policy. It is about the feeling of being viewed as an adversary rather than an ally. These are families who have spent generations building personal relationships in Florida, who frequent the same family-owned restaurants every season, and who have established deep routines and emotional anchors in specific neighborhoods. Their decision to leave is a rejection of a political climate that treats their national identity as a punchline. The timeline of this collapse is documented with brutal clarity. At the start of 2025, Canadian tourism to Florida was actually trending upward, showing strong booking numbers and a promising winter season. However, once the rhetoric concerning tariffs and annexation intensified in February, the trajectory shifted violently. By April, only 2 months after the peak of these trade tensions, the number of northern visitors to South Florida began a precipitous decline. By midsummer, the Tourism Bureau of Fort Lauderdale, which typically anticipates over 1 million Canadian visitors a year, saw its foundational demand evaporate, creating a vacuum that has left hotels, restaurants, and retail operations struggling to survive. Furthermore, the real estate exodus tells a much more distressing story about the long-term structural damage being inflicted upon the state's economic future. When a Canadian family decides to sell their vacation property, they are not merely canceling a single trip. They are severing permanent economic and social ties that may never be restored. This process involves removing themselves from the property tax rolls and terminating contracts with a vast network of local service providers, including property management firms, landscaping companies, and maintenance contractors. According to data from the Florida Realtors Association, the geographical corridor stretching from Miami to West Palm Beach is experiencing the most acute decline in Canadian ownership, and analysts warn that this trend is currently in an acceleration phase rather than a stabilization phase. There is a terrifying realization among industry insiders that these are not temporary losses that can be easily reversed with a new marketing campaign or a slight change in trade deals. Once a household has made the emotional and financial decision to sell and redirect their loyalty to the Caribbean, Mexico, or Europe, they are unlikely to return simply because the political temperature cools. This represents a permanent market exit and a fundamental restructuring of Florida's tourism infrastructure, which was built on the assumption that Canadians would always migrate south for the winter like the snowbirds they are named after. The 2025 season shattered this predictability, with surveys from specialized advisory groups showing that the percentage of traditional snowbirds willing to travel to the USS dropped from 82% to 70% in a single year, a catastrophic shift that translates to tens of thousands of households abandoning the state. The economic multiplier effect of this departure is devastating because snowbirds are not weekend travelers. They are long-term residents who lease cars, frequent local gyms, join community clubs, and utilize the local healthcare system for months at a time. Every layer of the service economy is feeling the foundation crumble. Data from the Palm Beach region confirms that this pattern is consistent across all demographics and income levels, suggesting a coordinated psychological withdrawal. Business owners like Richard Clavette in Hollywood, Florida, have described the year as a total departure from decades of stability, with reservations being canceled and a sense of desperation taking hold. The attempt to replace this specific high-value demographic with domestic American travelers is proving to be an unsustainable strategy, as domestic tourists typically do not offer the same longevity or consistent spending patterns as their Canadian counterparts. Nationally, the situation is equally grim, with Canadian travel to the United States dropping by a full quarter in early 2025, leading to billions of dollars in lost international spending and putting over 100,000 American jobs at risk. These are not just statistics. They are real livelihoods, housekeepers, servers, and small business owners whose economic survival depends on a relationship that has been recklessly damaged. Despite the mounting evidence, the political response from Florida's leadership has often been characterized by a dismissive tone. By focusing on aggregate tourism numbers that include other international markets, officials have attempted to mask the specific and catastrophic collapse of the Canadian sector. This disconnect from reality is perhaps most evident in the public disputes between state leaders and Canadian officials, which have only served to further alienate a once loyal demographic. Markets are driven by human psychology as much as they are by numbers, and once a group of consumers feels that they are no longer welcome or respected, the damage is often permanent. The tragedy of this crisis lies in its complete avoidability. It was not an inevitable economic cycle, but a direct result of prioritizing political theater over the stability of a vital international partnership. The families selling their homes and finding new traditions in the Caribbean are not doing so out of hostility, but as a rational response to being treated with disrespect by the leadership of a country they once loved. As they redirect billions of dollars to other nations, Florida is left to face a future where one of its most reliable economic pillars has been fundamentally undermined, leaving a scar on the regional economy that will likely persist for generations.